We're ready to begin our Farmdoc daily webinar dealing with prevent plant and late planting decisions. You have Todd Hubbs here, Jonathan Coppess, and Gary Schnitkey. So we're going to lead you through this, and here are our topics. Todd's going to provide a market outlook. We're going to then quickly talk about 4 or 5 topics. One is soybeans and taking that 35% prevent plant payment and planting soybeans. Say that fast.
Yeah, that's a tough
one. Cover crop update. We did have some changes on cover crops this past week. SCO, because we keep getting questions on it. We'll cover that, and then we'll provide an all too early farm income, and then we'll just run up what we don't know about policy yet. So that's our game plan for today. We do have a poll for you. Then this poll is for, and Todd's going to begin here with his market outlook, looking at balance sheets here a little bit. We didn't put this in a question. Hopefully you recognize this by the numbers. Hopefully we won't see soybeans down in those ranges, but corn, what do you expect for corn?
So this is the Todd Hubbs poll. Pick your price.
Pick your price. And
I did not put this poll out there.
I put this poll out there. just so you know. All right. So where poll is closed. Here's what you said. You said 40% believe between 4 and 475, and then over 50% believe it's going to be over 475 in some form or another. So there you go. Thank you for your poll. And one other announcement before we get to this, and this is always important. If you're going to have a prevent plant payment, contact your crop insurance agent, and particularly for corn, if you want to have prevent plant for corn, you need to get in there and declare that payment. We're over it. So you're too late for corn. Prevent plant payment still can do that for soybeans. Again, we are going to have to file CCC 576 with the Farm Service Agency for prevent plant acres. Farm Service Agency extended that deadline, and crop insurance information can serve as that form, but those details as well as the acreage reports need to be done here really soon, and the acreage reporting date is July 15th. So, Todd, where are we at?
We're about the same place we were last Wednesday on the 18-19 balance sheets. What you're seeing here, folks, is USDA's 18-19 forecast in the first column. I'm basically there with them on the use numbers in the second column. We saw some strength in export sales last week. That's promising. I still think that 1.7 billion bushels will be close to the final number at 18-19. So we're looking at carrying out at least 1.07 billion bushels. It may go down, it may go up, but it's going to be somewhere in that range. The real question for soybeans is the 19-20 and the supply situation. USDA's numbers in June, they still had a 49.4 yield with 84.6 million planted acres. We saw crop conditions, the initial crop conditions report for soybeans come out on Monday. They said at 54, good and excellent. Last year at the same time, they were at 73, so that gives you an idea how the crop's shaping up. And we saw the progress report. There's still a little over 12 million acres of beans out there to plant. I think the key for thinking about where soybean acres will be is there's 6 million acres still in Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan. I just can't see all those going in this year. So when I look at 19-20 forecast and the supply side, I've got 2 scenarios down there. If you guys have been watching this every week, I used to have it 2 million acres up. Now I don't. I think with the weather we had over the last week and a half, now it's drying out and clearing up. I don't know how many of those soybean acres will go in. If somebody does, I'll be happy to talk to you about it. But I've got a no acreage change, but I've faded the yield a little bit more. I'm at 46.4. That's 3 bushels below USDA. That's where my models are at on my weekly yield forecast models for the crop year. I think that's reasonable. It could go higher. We could see a very nice summer, but the amount of beans that have been planted basically in a double crop status, I think, makes soybean yields on the downside, and I think we'll see that in July. So right now, if we get no acreage change, I'm looking at about 4.98 billion bushel worth of supply. I still have the use numbers the same. We'll see with exports. It's really going to come down to a trade deal. I know the G20 summit's starting this weekend. These guys keep talking like there might be a deal, but they're the boys that cried wolf. No one believes them anymore. I'll believe it when I see it, and I think you should feel the same way about it. So we're looking at about an ending stocks with no acreage change, about 933 million bushels, which I put at about an 815 price. Now, if we lose 3 million acres, which is feasible, I think it really comes down to how much switching went on from other spring crops to beans in the window and how many prevent plant acres are in place. I'm sort of leaning toward 2 to 3 million acres of loss. I don't think we'll see it in the June acreage report on Friday. The trade thinks the USDA will be around 84.3 million acres in the June acreage report. I don't think the June acreage report is going to be a very solid indicator of where soybean acres will be this year, mainly because of when the surveys went out and the weather we've had since then and the kind of delayed planting we've seen. But if we lost 3 million acres, I'm looking at an ending stocks of about 800 million bushels, which I would put the price 19.6% stocks to use. I think we could see 850. But that's where I'm at on beans right now. If you wanted to take away, I started fading yield harder, and I'm sort of seeing some acreage loss in soybeans in 1920. With corn, we have the 1819 forecast there. I'm a little lower on feed and residual. We're going to get an indication with the grain stocks report this Friday about how feed and residual is progressing. USDA is at 5.3 billion bushels. We'll see. We could see a surprise in the June stocks report. I doubt it. We're seeing a pickup in ethanol demand, which is good and expected for the summer driving season. Everybody's out there driving around finally. The only place for worry and consumption, I think, is exports. We've seen it weaken a bit. That 2.2 billion bushels, I still think is on target, but we could come in short of that before it's all said and done. We can continue to see export sales weaken and weekly export inspections below the pace to hit the 2.2 billion. Don't be surprised if that fades another 30 to 40 million bushels before it's all said and done. But having said that, we're looking at ending stock somewhere in the 2.2 to 2.24 billion bushel range, 350, 360 corn price. Just like in beans, it comes back to supply. The USDA in the June WASDE report lowered acreage 3 million planted acreage and lowered yield 10 bushels an acre to 166. I've said since we've done this, I'm fine with that 166. Actually, my models, the reason I'm fine with it is my models have it at about 166.4, 166, 166.4. At this point, it's really early. What you're going to see on here is the difference in supply. I've been working on this the last few weeks. The import numbers. I've upped those significantly. I've done some work. I think if we lost another 7 million acres off the current 89.8, we could see about 155 million bushels of imports. Huge crops in South America. And I think the import potential, particularly in the Southeast, I don't know if it's going to come up the Mississippi River Valley. Prices would have to get pretty high, I think, for that to be competitive, even if we'd have to lose a lot of supply. These import numbers you're seeing, they may be a little high, but I don't think so. I spent quite a bit of time working through a model. So about 155 million bushels of imports, particularly in the Southeast, maybe down in the Delta a bit as well, out of South America and some out of Canada if their crop turns out all right. So I think that's going to mitigate some of the upside in the supply scenario. That's with a 7 million acre loss above. So I say this relative to USDA, that would be 10 million acres from the March perspective plantings, and the 10 million acre forecast is a 13 million acre hit. I don't know if that's going to happen. I'm sort of settling in the 10 million acre range. When you take into prevent plant failed acres, I think we'll be in that range before it's all said and done. The trade's expecting about 86.7 million acres in the June acreage report, but I don't think that's the final say. When we look at consumption, I'm basically where I have been the last couple of weeks, which puts us at about a 1.1 to 1.27 billion bushel carryout, depending on what our supply scenario is. That puts us in the 5 to 550 range. As I said last week, I think it's too early to fade yield too hard on corn, but there is downside potential there.
All right, and here's so that 550. Just to be clear, is a market year average price for corn, and that isn't the harvest price that would be used for.
No, that's not. That's a seasonal average price. If you took out, it's basically weighted by how much marketing goes on month by month in the marketing year and the cash prices from everybody that markets corn. I mean, we've seen basis strengthen in corn, even in the July delivery window in a lot of places. Depending on where you're at, I've seen prices well above July futures. We've seen them strengthen in the harvest price window as well. So we're in one of those situations with corn where futures have been going up. They're weak a little bit this morning on weather, basically, I think, and the basis is strengthening. So that's sort of a delayed pricing scenario. I will say this. I think it's time to start thinking hard about your price objectives for corn. We're getting closer and closer to where I think you might be hitting your price objectives in the coming months, particularly. We'll see how the summer turns out and how much acreage we lose. But I do believe that $5 range is very feasible.
And how many acres of soybeans prevent plant do you think we're looking at?
I think we're in the 4 to 5 million acre range. If you want to plant soybeans now, I understand that, but we're almost to July, and there's still a lot of acres out there. I think some will get planted, but not the full scope we're in. But I also think there was some switching. I know there's a lot of rumors out there that the Western Corn Belt didn't switch and ended up planting a bunch of corn in the second, third weeks of June. Look, if you want to plant corn the second, third weeks of June in the Dakotas, good for you. But I don't think that happened. Now, I could be wrong, but I don't think that happened.
All right. Speaking of soybeans, planting soybeans, there is now an important options, I guess. So if some farmers took prevent plant corn, have all of their soybeans planted, so they would have to have, or you would have to have all your soybeans planted on your soybeans acres. There is an option to plant soybeans on prevent plant corn. That occurs after we reach the end of the late planting period. Our date for Illinois is June 5th for most of the state and May 31 for the last part of the state. So those are our final plant dates for corn. Again, after that date, you can still plant corn, but the guarantee goes down, and we're now at 60% of the guarantee in all of Illinois because we're after the late planting period. You still can plant corn, but now if you have taken or declared a prevent plant payment for corn, because we are at the end of the late planting period, and again for corn, that's 20 days. And if I can do math, that'd be June 25th for most of the state. And my lawyer says I'm right on that. So this is June 26th. So we can now plant soybeans on our prevent plant corn. And again, here's the decision that we're looking at. We have acres intended for corn. The corn has been declared a prevent plant payment. We're after the late plant period, so we are after the late plant period. You can now take 35% of the corn prevent plant payment and plant soybeans now. So and actually you can plant any crop, but we're particularly focusing here on soybeans. Again, if we still have acres intended for soybeans, you can still do the full range of things and you can still plant soybeans, but I would tell you also that your guarantee is going down, which will be illustrated because we're going to take a specific example here of the first one of what we first talked about, taking the 35% corn prevent plant payment and planting soybeans. So we got a poll for you. We're gonna see how many of you think this is going on. Do you know anyone considering planting soybeans on prevent plant corn land? So if you wouldn't mind, take a poll. And this is about what we would expect. Well, maybe more than I would expect. Your poll is being taken now. again, we'll run through this on our next slide as you're taking this poll, but you can take you'll get 35% of the corn payment, prevent plant payment, and then you will plant soybeans on that. So our poll says 62% of you said no, 19% of you said some are talking about it, 13 some may plant, and 6 many may plant. So most amongst the people here, that's actually more than I thought would be on it. Again, here's what happens when we take that 35% prevent plant and plant soybeans. You'll get 35% of the corn prevent plant payment, pay 35% of the corn insurance premium. You can plant soybeans, and again, after the late plant period, and again, the late plant period here is for corn. And soybeans will be insured if you have crop insurance. So if you have crop insurance on soybeans, you will pay premium on that, and those will be insured. The specific case I'm discussing here is you don't have a double crop history. If you have a double crop history, you actually may be able to get the full prevent plant payment, and you probably should be talking to your crop insurance agent about that. If you do plant soybeans, again, this is you have full season soybean insurance, you'll use 60% of your APH will be the yield for corn prevent plant in 2019, so that will be generally lower. And you'll use the actual yield for your APH yield for determining your APH on soybeans in 2019. So those are the impacts. All right, I'm going to give a specific example here, just to look at this situation. I'm going to say we have a 200 bushel APH yield and an 80% RP policy. If we had taken the prevent plant payment in that case, that payment is $352 per acre. So our prevent plant payment in this case is $352 an acre, and there's some cost associated with that, and that would include the weed control cost and the crop insurance premium on that, so $312. So $312 would be the net return from taking prevent plant payment. And as we always say, that's not net income. We haven't subtracted off overhead cost or cash cost, or land control cost from that. Going to compare that to planting soybeans. All right, so I'm going to say you have a 50 bushel APH yield and 80% RP policy. As we increase the APH yield, particularly relative to the corn APH, doing this will look more attractive. Our guarantee, crop insurance guarantee, if planted on June 26, and this is in central and southern Illinois, northern Illinois, it would be lower than this, but our guarantee would be $358, which is 50 bushel APH yield, $954 projected price, 80% coverage level, and that's gone down 6% because we're 6 days into the late planting period for soybeans. Just so we know, if we will get in the crop insurance payment with an RP policy, if the yield is less than 37 bushels per acre, which actually is probably pretty close to what you would expect the yield to be. I don't know, maybe you're more optimistic and think you could get 40, but I'm just going to calculate our revenue given we get 37 bushels per acre. And if we get 37 bushels per acre, our lowest revenue would happen if we had no increase if our harvest price was the same as our projected price, $9.54, and I'm using a 40-cent basis. If you look at those, you would not get an insurance payment in this case because I set it so you just get 37 bushels and our harvest price hasn't gone down, and you would get something close to $338 in that case. And I'm putting in there a 40-cent basis. We can argue whether that's good or bad, but 40-cent basis. We're guessing at a lot of things anyway, but $338 of revenue. And again, this is the lowest revenue. You could build cases where this will be higher than this. Actually, lower yields and higher prices would make this higher. Just so sort of put your scenario in here at a pretty low one. All right, what would your net revenue be from that case? All right, you would give up 35% of your corn prevent plant payment. So that would be $125 of revenue from the corn prevent plant payment. You would subtract off 35% of your corn insurance premium, $5. You would get that $338 of revenue from soybeans. And now I'm going to say you're going to have $200 of cost from soybeans. You can argue with me, but this is, I would consider this a pretty low cost. I mean, if you're going to harvest it, you have $40 in harvesting cost. You're going to plant it. You got the seed. Maybe you can do it for less than that. Maybe you can do for that. You know, typically we would be looking at much higher cost for full season soybeans. So you're probably not going all out for yield in this scenario. This is, you know, you're not putting fungicides down or anything like that. You're 200. All right. And we're going to assume that you get $50 of MFP payment. We don't know that. We don't know what that number is. And I'm also making an assumption here that they're going to make an MFP payment on double crop soybeans. So that would give us a $308 net return, and that compares to $312 net return from taking prevent plant payment. So under that scenario, it's lower, it's a push. So you can be somewhat optimistic maybe and say, I'm going to get a higher yield or prices are going up. But right now, that from a this year perspective is pretty close to a push. And, you know, again, you have to work those numbers. But that is sort of where we're looking at there for this year. All right, we're using the 954 projected price, which was the projected price for this year. All right, so cover crops is the only thing that we've had USDA tell us something more about. All right, Jonathan?
Yeah, so far, unless something happened here in the last 22 minutes, this is really the only major update on policy issues at this time.
So cover crops and crop insurance, and there's also some MFP considerations which aren't new, but we don't know much about those. And again, let me just summarize what happened last week. RMA relaxed the rules on cover crops, and in particular, what they have done is to move the grazing and haying date up to September 1. So prior to the relaxing the rules, if you planted a cover crop, you could hay or graze it after November 1. Now this year you can do it September 1. You can also make haylage, baleage, and silage after September 1. And you usually could not do that. So this year you can harvest those cover crops as forages, and this includes silage from corn. So this year you can make silage from corn, and those were the major rule relaxations this year. So this was designed particularly to help livestock producers facing forage needs, and likely will help dairy producers in Wisconsin and elsewhere as they're facing forage issues up there. Just to summarize this, if you have 100%, if you're not going to hay or graze that cover crop, if you're not going to harvest it, you're not going to hay it, you're not going to graze it, which would be the typical situation for grain farms in northern, central, southern Illinois. They don't have livestock. You're going to get 100% of the prevent plant payment in. You really don't have a lot of concerns, particularly if you're planting traditional cover crops like cereal rye, oats, radishes. There aren't a lot of concerns with planting cover crops on prevent plant farmland. You can use soybeans and corn as a cover crop. So this year you can use soybeans and corn as a cover crop. And again, RMA indicated that would be the case. But if you do that, it adds some concerns. In particular, if you think about it, soybeans as a cover crop look a lot like soybeans as a harvestable crops. So if you're going to do this and you use soybeans or corn, and again, you can see some of the reasons why you would want to do it. Soybeans, you might have treated seeds. You're concerned with the germs, so you're going to use that this year. Make sure if that's the case, you're going to communicate, and you should be always communicating, but communicate well with the crop insurance agent and the loss adjuster, and make sure that there aren't particular concerns with populations and other planting requirements, that you make sure that those are met if you're going to plant that soybeans and corn as a cover crop. So in most cases, the populations would be lower for a cover crop, and but again, talk about that with your crop insurance agent and loss adjuster. So there are also, and this chart is from RMA. Now you want to hay or graze it or make silage. So if you make haylage, silage, graze it, make hay after September 1, you will get 100% of your prevent plant payment. All right. So if you wait to September 1, you will get 100% of that prevent plant payment. If you do it before September 1, you're likely going to lower and maybe eliminate that prevent plant payment. All right. So corn, now let me just give an example of corn prevent plant payment. The late planting period ended June 25th. If you plant a cover crop now or from now forward, June 26th on in most of Illinois, and then you harvest or graze it or hay that cover crop before September 1, you'll get 35% of the prevent plant payment. 35% of the premium will be paid. In that case, the cover crop is being treated like a second crop. On the other hand, if you've already planted forages on that land in the late planting period, you hay or graze it before September 1, you get 0% of the prevent plant payment. And again, you just get 0. So if that's the case, you get 0. And there may be some cases where we have a cover crop out there that was planted last fall and it didn't get planted. You can't hay or graze that right now because you'll lose the prevent plant payment, but you'll be able to hay or graze it after September 1. Again, for most, if you're in a grain situation, these rules aren't a particular concern, and species selection is the issue. And again, you can plant corn or soybeans, but you want to make sure that you're planting those corn or soybeans as a cover crop. Again, the market facilitation program was announced that there will be a minimum market facilitation payment if the cover crop has the potential to be harvested. Again, this is the market facilitation program. This is completely separate from crop insurance items. And if you harvest it, you may get a minimal MFP payment, but those rules that I just listed above still apply. We don't have a definition of minimum or the definition of a potential to be harvested. Again, that does not change the crop insurance decision rules, and EQIP will be, USDA also announced EQIP will be open in select states for a period.
And this is the NRCS program that provides cost share for some conservation, or for a large list of conservation practices. So if you're interested in this is one of those times that maybe go talk to your NRCS folks as well to get a sense of what might be available in these select states.
Yeah. And one piece of advice that you can follow or not is you might wait, if you're not time pressed to plant your cover crop, you might wait a week or two and we might have more clarity on that. There's no guarantee that there will be clarity, though. So, one of the things you might consider is waiting and see what MFP and EQIP rules do turn out to be.
Yeah, but I think we just want to continue to emphasize that this market facilitation program, we'll come back to it again towards the end of the discussion here today, but this market facilitation program is not going to impact or change crop insurance rules. And we have to stress that because you just sort of have to understand how these things are set up. Crop insurance rules are, per statute and regulation. This MFP program, they're just creating. And so it's gonna have to operate in its own little space, and it's not going to be able to really impact crop insurance. So you want to make sure you're following your crop insurance rules and guidance from your agent, because you do not want to get crossways with that, making a gamble on some program payment that, frankly, we don't have details about.
Yeah. So, maybe you look at that as a lottery. If you plant cover crops, you might get a minimal payment. All right. We're going to talk a little bit about SCO now, and we got another poll here. We continue to get SCO questions, so we're going to cover this briefly today. So just get a feel for what you think, and we don't know this yet. We don't know how many acres. I have the feeling that there were more SCO out there this year than last year, and we won't know those acres until we have the acreage reports summarized. And again, those crop insurance acreage report due date is July 15th. So we're not going to know much, but this year is a special year for SCO.
Well, and this is also, I take it you're thinking of that somewhat because of the ability to change a program decision from the Ark County program to PLC, which you can then get SCO and PLC together. So,
all right. So very little was 23%, less than 10%, 44%, between 10 and 50%, 30%, over 50%, 4%. So there's your thoughts on it. And if we average that would probably be pretty close to what I would think. I don't know. So let's just talk about this. So farmers may have signed up for the supplemental coverage by March 15th. And this is a crop insurance on top of the combo product. And SCO is eligible if you take PLC, not Ark County.
And just a quick review on this, right? SCO was created in the 2014 Farm Bill as it's supplemental coverage. So you buy county-wide or area-wide coverage on top of or above your individual coverage level. So you've got that sort of space there where you can buy up a county level and add it to your individual. The exception being you cannot do that where you have the Ark County program, the revenue program created in 14. You cannot do that on that crop. So you can't mix SCO and PLC because, frankly, that would operate as a pretty blatant double coverage, double payment situation.
So, but this year you have not made the decisions for Ark and PLC.
Right.
So this year you haven't made a decision for Ark PLC. You may have selected SCO, and but you haven't made the decision to take Ark or PLC. So this year is unusual in that we haven't made that Ark PLC decision. Yeah. That Ark PLC decision, that decision period will begin later.
Yeah, we presume that'll be this fall. So we're in this space, in this typical Farm Bill implementation space where you've got your crop insurance deadline of March 15, but the FSA has not had a chance to get the rules out on the changes from the 18 Farm Bill. So we're in kind of this area where they're gonna make exceptions to some of this to help ease the decision process on SCO and PLC.
So on your 2019 acreage report, you will indicate the intent to take PLC. So if you check that box or however it looks on your farm and say you intend to take PLC and you purchase SCO, you will get SCO coverage this year. All right. So if you signed up for SCO and then you say, I don't intend to take PLC, you won't have the SCO coverage this year. And again, that will be the July 15th acreage report that determines whether or not you have that coverage.
Right. This is an example where your SCO decision is not going to lock you in on ARC and PLC. You'll have a chance to revisit SCO if you make an ARC decision. That's what
July 15th, if you make that decision or you make that declaration of intention, that intent, you can change your mind later on. So, or by which we mean the intent to take PLC, if you indicate that in the July 15th on your acreage report, you can then change that and take ARC for your crop or your commodity program. The ARC PLC decision, again, will be made later on, and we haven't really begun to think about it. But, with higher prices, ARC may begin to look more attractive. So we'll see all of that. But what you say on that July 15th acreage report will not lock you into ARC PLC decision later on. If you say you intend to take ARC on that July 15th report, and you signed up for SCO, your coverage, you won't get SCO coverage. You won't pay the premium. You will pay the administrative fee associated with SCO. So that's what we know about that. So that July 15th and that intent to take PLC is important from the standpoint, if you say you don't intend to take PLC, you won't have SCO coverage. All right. We have the all too early farm income projections because this is like your ESPN draft. It's all too early. All too early college football projections. Let me just we'll ask you and then
before we do it, let's see what you think, right? Before we go out and be wrong, let's give everybody a chance to be wrong with us.
Yeah, so we're asked. We're going to ask you this poll. What do you think? What do you think incomes are going to look like? And then after we see the poll, we'll tailor our.
Can you change your math real quick based on this?
Well, and again, we're getting that question. We're beginning to get that question about what farm incomes will look like, and obviously, we're getting, low planning or late planning does raise that issue, but we may have some price responses that help us out some. So our poll you said much lower, 23% said much lower, 48% somewhat lower, about the same, and 13% are optimistic this year and think they'll be higher than 2018 incomes.
The pessimists win, though. That's a pretty high amount.
So let me tell you the baseline that we're going to make a projection here, and I'm going to go through several scenarios. But in Illinois, farm business, farm management last year, 2019 income averaged about $124,000 per farm. And since 2013, we've had an average of about $70,000 per farm, just to put this, and tried to use that as a benchmark going forward. And we're going to do is simulate a 1,800 grain farm in 2019. We're going to do this with no prevent plant corn and with all prevent plant corn, just to give you sort of a range, not even going to consider soybeans in this. That 1,800 acre farm has 200 acre owned. The other is split between share and cash rent. We have an 80% RP, looking at a 200 bushel APH yield and 60 bushel APH yield for soybeans. So that's the basic situation. We are simulating are putting in here crop insurance payments. We're also going to do this in different levels of MFP payments. So just to give you a feel for what we were thinking that those incomes would look like before we began it. So before we began it, we weren't all that optimistic. We were putting in corn here. If we had 220 bushel corn, 65 bushel soybeans, 370 cash price on corn, 914 cash price on soybeans, we were thinking about a $33,000 net income been projecting lower incomes, and that would be the scenario where we continue to have above trend yields. And if we had below trend yields, minus 50,000. So we were never really high on this year's income projections. All right, now we're going to do some income projections after spring, and here's what those look like. All right, after this wet spring, and this is the case of no prevent plan, and I gave you actually 6 scenarios here. Let's say corn stays at 190, so you continue to have 190 bushel corn, soybeans at 50, lower than you would expect, but not dramatically lower. Cash price 450, so we've had an increase in cash price. Soybeans, I'm just leaving at 914, which is higher than it is today, roughly, Todd, probably a little bit higher.
Yeah, slightly higher.
And you're going to get $50 of MFP. In that case, with the MFP, you would have $68,000 of income, which would be not bad. And without the MFP, it would be minus $1,000. So that MFP, $50, and we don't know what that level is, but that makes a big difference this year, brings it up higher. Now let's say you have lower yields, 170 bushel corn, 45 bushel soybeans, no price increase, 450 corn. With the MFP, you get to minus $38,000, and without the MFP, 106. But then the final scenario, 170 bushel corn yield, you get $5 corn. And again, I'm not doing anything with soybean prices here, but $5 corn, you would get $20,000 of income minus 49. So, a lot of this will obviously depend on yields and prices. But if we get down to that sort of 170 and 45, we're going to have to see some price increases to sort of have some incomes that are positive and look sort of reasonable. All right, so that's with you did not have any prevent plant. Now at the right, you got no corn. You took all prevent plant, so you get a prevent plant payment. And I still keep that $50 per acre on soybean acres. The net income in that case would be minus 53s with the MFP payment, minus 87 without the MFP payment. And then the last one, minus 17. So let's say that your ad hoc disaster assistance comes in with something close to the MFP, you'd be minus 17. So, we're not looking, and again, if you're looking at those at negative, I'm assuming that you did not get out of your cash rent. You still have most of your overhead cost. We actually lowered those a bit, but, incomes could be low this year, particularly for those individuals that have a lot of prevent plant, which is what you would expect, I suppose. But that'll give you a feel for the all too early projections at this point in time. But if we have a significant amount of prevent plant, those prevent plant payments will be better than not having
cushion the hit on the income. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're on to the policy discussion.
We'll make this as quick and painless as possible because we don't really have much new to discuss. These are from last time around where we talked about acres planted in 18, sort of the rain information that we have. Again, the MFP program, there are no new updates since the June 10th. So we're operating on the same knowledge we had last time. The M still stands for a mystery. And basically all we know is we got about $14.5 billion for most of the Title I commodities except rye. That was should have been clarified last time. We had a good question on that. It's going to be a single county rate. We don't know what that single county rate is. They say they're working the regulations through the Office of Management and Budget, the usual process. So maybe we'll get more information soon. They've also, as Gary indicated, there's some potential minimal payment, whatever that might be, if you do a cover crop, but then there's some requirement for harvest. So, the bottom line is this still is a mystery payment, and we don't have a good sense of what they're trying to do with it. Where we get our $50 an acre again from last time, If we consider $14.5 billion, and you think we got 266.5 million acres planted last year, and there's some limit that you can't have planted higher than 18. The simplest, fairest, most equitable and straightforward way of doing this would be that 14.5 divided by 266.5, which is math even I can do. And I believe is $54.40 per acre. Knock off a few, and that's where Gary gets his $50. And I guess we can use that as our benchmark for whatever USDA comes up with. The other thing we want to just keep reminding everybody, just again briefly, the congressional legislation, the congressional ad hoc provisions for calendar year 18 and 19 disasters. Those are the hurricanes, floods, snowstorms, tornadoes, and so forth. There is only $3.005 billion available. Congress has provided that for a range of programmatic assistance for those disasters in 18 and 19. That includes block grants for forests restoration. That includes poultry and livestock losses, all out of the $3 billion. Tree assistance, land lost to volcanoes, $7 million for the whole farm revenue program in specific states. And then we get to the potential that USDA can take from whatever is left of that $3 billion and plus up crop insurance and NAP. The language in the statute says up to 90%. There is no way, there's just no way to make $3 billion stretch that, even if that was the only provision there. So do not bank on 90% for 18 and 19 losses. Same on the 70% for uninsured. What we do know is that it'll maybe be a minor plus up off of where it stands. You're not going to get 90 and 70% on this with that pot of money out there. So just a reminder on that. And this will take us into our next poll, and then we can go to questions if we have them here. Do you expect prevent planting acres to get an additional payment from the ad hoc disaster assistance legislation? So we've asked you to prognosticate about income, about planting. Why not about policy? Here we go. Do you expect prevent plant acres to get additional payments from the ad hoc program? No, less than the MFP, about the same as the MFP, or above the MFP payment rate. Let's see what kind of policy gamblers we have out there this morning. And with the poll closed, we are roughly half of you say no. The rest, almost all the rest of you say less than MFP. I think we're all on the same page with that one. So certainly some information there. Gary, did we lose the slides, or is that the last one?
Yeah.
Oh, click on it.
Oh, there we go. And just a reminder on these disaster declarations. So we have multiple kinds of disaster declarations from the federal government, presidential, secretarial. We have the administrator at the FSA can declare production losses. What we are looking at for that ad hoc. So this goes back into that $3 billion pot, how we can begin to wrap our minds around what might be available. Here are secretarial disaster declarations so far for calendar year 2019, or as of April, the last report we had from USDA. And these are largely drought counties. It has to be requested by the governor, the tribal leader, the FSA state executive director. We think of 30% production loss as triggering this. So you can imagine with some of the prevent plant and some of the late planting scenarios, we could have a lot of counties in 2019 that might be able to be designated at a production loss for at least one crop. So that would that would spread that $3 billion even further. Here's the 18 disaster areas. So a pretty large amount of counties and a large amount of production. So again, if you're thinking about that $3 billion, you're spreading this across quite a few acres.
2 years, right? You're spreading that.
Yeah, it covers under the statutory language, it covers both 18 and 19 calendar year disaster declarations. And again, we're making some assumptions here, one of which is that USDA will follow the standard procedure and rules, which they'll be using the county's declared disaster, not that they'll come up with some new way of spreading this money. So this is based on the presumption that the $3 billion goes to counties that have been declared for 18 and 19. Again, we're waiting to see more information on that. Similar, the presidential disaster, just as a comparison to the secretarial is largely this production loss situation. So that's really what we would expect a lot of that $3 billion to apply to. the potential out there where we have presidential disaster declarations. Frankly, these are more for the getting assistance out for immediate recovery and debris removal and those sort of things. We think of the major floods that really hit Iowa this year, for example, Nebraska and Illinois and places along the rivers that where the state is overwhelmed, they can declare the disaster and the FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, can come in and help. I'm not sure these the presidential will necessarily impact that $3 billion. I think we're more likely to see the Secretarial do that. But just to give you a sense of what we're looking at in 2 states, there's Iowa and Nebraska for the designations. Look, the bottom line of this again is that $3 billion pot from Congress is going to be spread over a large area and 2 calendar years worth of weather problems. So, a lot of this information, a lot of this talk about 90%, a top off or 90% on crop insurance or prevent plant is well ahead of what is likely the reality given the limited set of money and the what appears to be a nearly unlimited set of counties and acres that are gonna deal with that. So, just want to remind that and tamp down any expectations that the crop insurance is going to receive much of an increase. And again, it's going to be in those counties we would expect it to be in those counties that have been designated. So with that, I believe we have run through all the information that we have, what we know as we know it. We will continue, particularly with things like MFP, when the mystery is lifted in any way, shape, or form. We'll be certain to get that information out through Farmdoc Daily and other of our platform informational aspects. Keep checking Farmdoc Daily. Keep checking Farm Policy News, as we'll get that information out as soon as we have it. But right now, we're still in the same unknown situation about what those payments are going to look like and what county rates they're going to use and how they're going to deal with the cover crop situation. So hopefully we get those details in the near future. But right now we're still guessing at it. So with that, we got a few minutes here to take questions.
And we'd also like to thank Illinois Corn for their sponsorship of this. We're using a $9.54 projected price for soybeans because that is what that projected price is what's used to set guarantees on crop insurance. So when we were using that, we were sort of saying we were before all this started, and I continued to use a $9 price because I don't know.
And that $9.54, because it's the projected price, it's already set. So the only thing that can change as far as crop insurance is concerned is a harvest price that might be higher than that.
So and again, most people take revenue protection. So if they take in revenue protection, their guarantee could go up if the harvest price is above the projected price. So far, November contracts haven't reached $9.54 yet. So we're still below.
Todd, they got why do you expect corn feed and residual higher than USDA?
For 1920? That's a very good question. So right now the USDA is projecting the 18-19 marketing year feed residual 5.3. I think it's pretty safe to say they underestimated the size of the crop this year for corn. And if you take out some of the ethanol production, move corn back into the feed ration a little bit, out of distillers grains. I've done some calculations. It's hard to figure, but I think over the last few years, we've been seeing upwards of 580 million bushels of corn displaced by distillers grains. I think you can take that up a little bit. Now, the thing is the residual will be much smaller in a much smaller crop, but I think the switch over is there to be had, and I just think their number's too low. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. We got an MFP question. Doesn't MFP also allot money to animal agriculture and dairy? Would that decrease the amount of money expected per acre for row crops? And the simple answer is yes. So again, I guess the bottom line here is we haven't seen any of the details for this program. Dairy and some livestock has been included in MFP. Depending on how they do that, they're talking about a $16 billion package total, $14.5 billion in the direct payments. That's going to include alfalfa. It's going to include most of the covered crops, dairy. So, yeah, ultimately, it's going to reduce that amount per acre. We don't know until we get the details. So we are putting some rough guesses out there. Also on disaster assistance, does it apply to counties with presidential disaster designation? Again, we are awaiting any of the final details from USDA to tell us exactly how they're going to do this. It is possible, but we don't yet know exactly how they're going to divvy up the $3 billion across disaster counties. In the past, we're looking at both presidential and secretarial, but one of the reasons why we focus on the secretarial is just that would be the expectation around crop insurance, probably in particular because of production losses. But again, we are waiting to get the final details on that.
So would Army allow prevent plant acres to also be paid under the higher harvest price? All right. So the prevent plant payment now, just to back up a little bit, prevent plant payment now is a percentage, 55 for corn, 60 for soybean, of the guarantee using the projected price. RMA will not change that. Will not change that because that's written in the law. Or not necessarily law, but that's the terms of the crop insurance policy that exist. The only way that a prevent plant acre will get more is through the ad hoc disaster assistance, which it will be run by FSA, I'm presuming.
Well, again, we don't know. And this is where, so in general, right, let's sort of start with the general situation. In general, prevent plant indemnity uses only the projected price.
And that changed several years ago, just so you know.
Right. And that's booked into the SRA, the standard reinsurance agreement between the companies and USDA. So that is generally what we would expect. As Gary mentioned, the potential exception here is that the ad hoc disaster provision in the legislation from Congress does provide the Secretary the authority to use a harvest price in those areas. So that, again, whether they use secretarial designations or presidential or both, in those areas where they're applying the ad hoc to the $3 billion, there's the potential that the harvest price could be used in that calculation. But
that would blow $3 billion.
Right. I mean, the potential for that to use up to $3 billion. And if you think about 19, we won't know the harvest price in any kind of time frame when they're likely to send out that ad hoc assistance. I wouldn't be running to the bank with any of that potential. There really isn't that much funding available to do everything that's in that ad hoc provision.
So here's a question. Apparently, they've got a lot of questions for me. Could you walk us through the calculation of the average price? And is the weighted average prices paid to Illinois farmers? So the USDA collects information on cash prices throughout the country, and then how much has been marketed. And they have what are called marketing weights for month to month. So take for soybeans, for instance. We don't have it nationally, you have it state by state. Typically in Illinois, we see the greatest weights for like soybeans, for instance, in October, November, and January, right? They're usually 12 to 13%. And then you'll see 3 to 4% spread out, and then a little bit later in the marketing year. So they take the actual cash prices, weight it by how much was marketed, and come up with the seasonal average farm price. Now, we have no way to know that in 1920. So how do I do it? I look at, and this is a bunch of swagging on my part, but I go forward in the futures curve, and I think, where do I think the futures curve will be? And then I make some solid assumptions that I think are reasonable on basis. So for corn this year, when I'm looking at 1920, I've got slightly positive basis through most of the marketing year. Soybeans, I'm still down about minus 35 here in Illinois. And then on that, I take the marketing weights on an average of where I think the country would be and come up with my price. I hope that makes sense to everybody. Now, are those farm prices for Illinois? No, typically we see for corn, Illinois, depending on the year, 10 to 15 cents higher on corn, about the same on soybeans, depending on the year. Now, if we're in a year where we have really strong basis, Illinois will be higher because we're closer to a lot of the uses. The people out in the Western Corn Belt, their basis is atrocious, but that's their problem. That's not our problem. So here's another question. We saw 10 million acres planted. I hope that answers your question. If you have more, just email me, jhubs3@illinois.edu. I'm always happy to try to answer questions. We saw 10 million acres planted from this point in 1996, 14 million acres in 1981, 8 million acres in 2015. What are the chances we could face surprising progress in the next week? So I don't think you can take stuff before the current policy regime we're in and compare it to right now, apples to apples. Before 1996, 97, we didn't have prevent plant as an option. So to go back to say 81 or 83 or even 95, 96, like we've seen a lot of market observers do, I personally think is wrong-headed because prevent plant wasn't there as an option. Also, on the counter to that, this whole market facilitation payment thing, which has been rolled out like an old jalopy over the last month, providing a higher level of confusion than I think was necessary, may tear into that. I think we'll see acres planted. And if you saw my soybean and Gary's asking me how many prevent plant acres do I think there'll be, I'm about half of what we got left in the Eastern Corn Belt. So I think you'll see acres planted, but I don't think you'll see the kind of numbers we saw under a previous policy set of rules.
The other thing I would say is that you're still looking at really wet conditions out there.
Yeah, it's really wet.
It's just really, really wet. I mean, I talked to quite a few farmers, and I don't know anybody that was really proud of the soybeans that they did plant. And I'm talking about the areas, particularly of prevent plant. And, we just had a bunch of rain, and I don't know if it dries out some, maybe.
As an example, the picture on the screen was taken
Sunday. Yeah. So, yeah.
So it's possible to plant a lot of acres in a hurry if the weather cooperates and everything else. But I think.
Yeah, just remember, that picture is what we're facing. And we got rain in some of those areas since Sunday. So
I got rain last night.
Yeah.
A lot of parts. A couple quick, and then we're past the 9 o'clock hour, so we want to make sure we don't eat up everybody's too much time here this morning. But just a couple quick programmatic. So if you indicate PLC and take SCO, you would have the possibility of choosing the higher of SCO or ARC, but not receiving payments on both. So let's remember two things about this. The ARC PLC decision will happen sometime later this summer, early fall. Under the Farm Bill, it is a locked decision between ARC and PLC for the 19 and 20 crops before you have any options to revisit that. So you're going to be locked in for the first couple years. You cannot get ARC and PLC on the same base acre. Remember, these are base acre payments. These are SCO as a crop insurance. It depends on what you planted. There's this weird sort of overlap there. You cannot get ARC and PLC on the same base acre, and you cannot get SCO for the crop that you've entered ARC as the base acre. So if I take ARC County on corn, I can't get SCO for corn on that FSA farm. That's just similar to what the 14 Farm Bill was. The only difference in that under 18 is just that it's a 2-year decision at this point.
Yeah, and 2019, just remember, 2019, that intent to take PLC on July 15th is the deal.
Right.
For 2019. So for 2019, you can take ARC 2019 and still get the SCO payment.
Yeah.
So, but that's the only year you're going to do it. And so that intent to take PLC on the July 15th, if you signed up for SCO, and that's the deal.
One other ARC question real quick. ARC has set price so that we're looking at the price issues. So the Ark County program uses the market year average price to calculate the actual revenue in the year. And then it compares that to the 5-year Olympic average price, market year average price. So again, it's not a fall price, projected price under crop insurance. This is the 12-month marketing year average nationwide that is used in the ARC program as well as the PLC program. So the FSA payment programs use market year average prices. SCO will use either the higher the harvest or the projected price because it's an insurance policy that uses that harvest and projected price so long as that's part of the right. So long as you left that in the policy.
Yeah. This is Todd.
Todd, you want to take one last
What was this?
prognostication question here?
With 50% of the corn crop planted after June 1st on 160, yield seems optimistic. With Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio yields cut and unable to boost national average, can we expect yield to come down in subsequent reports? I think that's a reasonable thing to say. I'm not willing to cut my yield numbers more than the 166 right now for corn. And as I said in the last webinar we did last week, I think we'll have a much better idea in the middle of July as we see the conditions evolve. If it's going to dry out a bit, we get those heat units up over the next couple of weeks. We can see corn move pretty well. Is it reasonable to expect more yield cuts? I think it probably is based on the amount of corn we've seen planted in June. And from my perspective, that means I think the fill window may have shrunk dramatically for a lot of people. If you're pollinating in early August to mid-August, you've shrunk the number of days to fill this thing. And the rounds being set, it's just, there's a lot going on. I think it is a reasonable expectation, but I'm holding off right now on paying them anymore.
So let me give. So this year it seemed to me, and you disagree with me. All right. So we can get this higher yields if end of July, early August is conducive to pollinate them.
That's right.
Which would be wetter and cooler than normal, I suppose.
Well, we need the heat right now, right? We need a perfect summer.
Yep. Yeah. You need a perfect summer, and then what you don't need is an early frost.
We don't need an early frost. And I know everybody out there, and I get this question all the time. Everybody's wondering if we're going to have an early frost. I have no idea. Right?
Yep.
Now, my preference would be, yes, up in the northern plains, and like a September 1st frost, that would be great, right? Not for us, but for them. And it could happen, but I think you got to go by the averages. And normally you're looking into mid-October for those places, right? And later October down here, depending on where you're at.
So. Should we be postponing Thanksgiving dinner because we'll be harvesting on Thanksgiving?
I think some people that planted in the second, third week of June may have a nice Christmas on the combine. So depending on how this all plays out. But yeah.
We got one more comment. Thanks a lot, guys. By the way, it was wet the last 2 weeks, and progress was huge. And we will see. But it's been an unusual year, and we're projecting just like everybody else without past data.
Well, that's right. And there can't be much more unknown than the weather at this point, given. It's sort of funny to talk about a perfect summer and a perfect fall after this spring. So I guess factor that in. With that, I believe we have exhausted our hour plus. We appreciate everybody's time here this morning, and stay tuned as we'll update as we can.
Thank you.